The world won't learn of the incident for another year. But when it does, it will be called the My Lai Massacre. April. Martin Luther King goes to Memphis to lead a protest by that city's black garbage collectors.
We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to the mountaintop. I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over, and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land.
The very next day, it happens. King is shot down outside his Memphis hotel room by James Earl Ray. In the wake of King's murder, rioting breaks out in 26 American cities. The worst occurs in the nation's capital. For the first time since the Civil War, armed soldiers are sent to protect the Capitol building.
There's nothing wrong with America today that a good election won't cure.
May. Campaigning for the soon-to-be vacant White House begins full blast. Bobby Kennedy, Hubert Humphrey, and Richard Nixon lead the pack. June. Bobby Kennedy moves into the lead for the Democratic nomination with a victory in the California primary. At the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles, a jubilant Kennedy talks of future victories.
My thanks to all of you, and now it's on to Chicago, and let's win there.
Kennedy's security men decide to take him out of the hotel through the kitchen. Sirhan Bishara Sirhan is waiting there with a gun.
Oh, my God. Senator Kennedy has been shot. And another man, a Kennedy campaign manager, and possibly shot in the head. I am right here. Rayford Johnson has a hold of a man who apparently has fired the shot.
The gun used by Sirhan was first purchased 3 years before by a white homeowner for protection during the Watts riots. It was later sold several times before finally ending up in the kitchen of the Ambassador Hotel. August. Richard Nixon is nominated at the Republican convention. It culminates one of the most dramatic comebacks in American political history. After losing to Kennedy in 1960, Nixon suffered a smashing defeat in the 1962 race for the governorship of his home state, California. At that time, in a bitter news conference, Nixon seemed to give up politics.
And you will now write it, you will interpret it, that's your right. But as I leave you, I want you to know, just think how much you're going to be missing. You don't have Nixon to kick around anymore.
And now, in 1968, Nixon's the one once again. His party's choice for president of the United States. His running mate is Spiro Agnew. The Democrats, meantime, are in a shambles. Anti-war youth, still shocked by the murder of Bobby Kennedy, go on a rampage at the Chicago convention. Mayor Richard Daley orders his forces to fight back against the yippies, and the result is later called a police riot. Disorders spread from the street to inside the convention hall itself. But finally, the Democrats nominate Hubert Humphrey and Edmund Muskie. September. Nixon, campaigning on a law and order ticket, reaches the hearts and minds of middle America.
Oh, yeah. Right.
Humphrey is repeatedly heckled and booed by anti-war demonstrators. Surveys had Humphrey so far behind, he couldn't see the light at the end of the Gallup poll. October. Humphrey promises to stop the bombing in Vietnam and makes a spectacular rise in the polls. Nixon is worried for the first time. For a brief moment that October, the nation took its eyes off the campaign. On the island of Scorpios, Jacqueline Kennedy was married to Aristotle Onassis. Onassis owned the island and about $500 million worth of other goodies as well. People wondered why Jackie, wealthy in her own right, would marry a man a quarter of a century her senior. Perhaps the best answer came from Bob Hope. Nixon has a Greek running mate, wisecracked Hope, and now everybody wants one.
I saw many signs in this campaign.
November. Nixon and his Greek running mate win the election by less than 1% of the popular vote. Nixon promises to follow the advice on a sign he saw during the campaign and bring the country together again. December. Perhaps the most tumultuous year in American history ends on a hopeful note, as North Korea releases the crew of the Pueblo. They arrive home on Christmas Eve after nearly a year of brutal treatment. It didn't always seem like it, but the vast majority of Americans in the violent 60s were non-hippie, non-yippie, non-political, and non-military. And for a lot of them, this was the way to have fun, 60s style. They were called swingin' singles, and this was their scene. Thousands of poolside apartment complexes, amounting to not much more than co-ed dormitories, sprang up across the nation in the 60s, giving young people a good opportunity to find a mate, maybe even get married. If you got tired of hanging around the apartment, you could always mosey on down to the nearby singles bar and look for some fresh talent. Either way, the object was lovin' and funnin', and some people even managed to find some of each. For those who didn't, there was still hope. The nation's computers, when they weren't mapping out trajectories for ICBMs, were being programmed to map out flight plans for Cupid's arrows. Not all women would submit to such indignities. The late 60s saw the first stirrings of what would come to be known as women's lib. When the first female protesters burned their bras at Atlantic City, their purpose was definitely not to make an easier target for Cupid's arrows. In November of 1965, long before people were burning bras, they suddenly found themselves burning candles. Virtually without warning, 30 million people in the Northeast were suddenly plunged into darkness when a massive surge of electricity blew out all the power stations in an 80,000 square mile area. It was the largest power failure in history. In New York City, nearly 1 million people were trapped for a time underground in the subway system. Some of the blackout victims were apparently burning their candles at both ends. Exactly 9 months after the massive power failure, hospitals in the area reported a massive surge in the birth rate.
Let's welcome Mr. Ricky Haven.
But love would have to wait until 1969 for its biggest moment of the decade. A huge throng of young people, stretching as far as the eye could see, gathered in the farmland outside Woodstock, New York, for a combination love-in, smoke-in, rock concert, and general happening. There were 400,000 of them. A lot of them seemed to forget their clothes. But almost no one forgot his marijuana. Conditioned by 9 years of youthful violence, the police were ready for anything. Amazingly, there wasn't even a fist fight. It went on for 60 hours, and when it ended, the kids even cleaned up the litter. The older generation was astounded. Maybe there was some hope for these damn hippies after all. But was there any hope for a president who would set off an international protest by picking up his pet beagle dog by the ears? Or by proudly showing the world the scars from his latest operation? Well, maybe, but it sure wasn't Camelot anymore. And was there any hope for any of us when a malcontent named Charles Manson could lead a band of youngsters on a murder spree that would take 7 lives? Manson called his followers his family.